Hello, I'm Captain Luis Carlos Montalvan. I'll give you a brief description of my duty over the course. Can you hear me? Is this? Okay. I couldn't hear myself.
Yeah.
Hello?
There you are.
Okay. I joined the Army at 17 in 1990 and was a communications specialist for a couple of years before moving on to the Military Police Corps, before moving on to the infantry. Getting closer?
Here.
Oh, maybe that one's better.
This other one.
Sorry, folks.
That's right.
And does that work? Okay. And subsequent to serving 5 years as a military policeman, I joined the infantry and then decided to commission. So I went through the green to gold process at the University of Maryland and commissioned at Georgetown in early 2003. Went to Fort Knox, received training as a armor cavalry officer, and during that time, of course, the country was at odds with respect to the necessity of the invasion, et cetera. I was skeptical, but as I've told a few reporters here and elsewhere, that being a product of the 80s and 90s, generally speaking, under administrations Reagan, Bush Sr., and Clinton, of course there were scandals, but for the most part we had prosperous we had prosperous economies, we had capable and competent leaders, and as a service member I had no reason to doubt that that the evidence that was being collected to substantiate the necessity for an invasion of Iraq was warrantless. So, and considering the fact that General Colin Powell, who is and was esteemed so highly, testified before the UN, that kind of was pervasive in my mind as to whether or not I should, I should go, although it's not as though I had much choice. Although I could have conscientiously objected, I've been a warrior for more than half my life, so that really wasn't an option for me. The subsequent to training at Fort Knox, I was sent to Iraq in September of '03, and I was assigned as a scout platoon leader in an area along the Syrian-Iraqi border known as Al-Walid, which is a border crossing point, also known as a port of entry. And it's one of the most strategically important POEs in general, ports of entry in general, are very strategic because, as you know, Iraq is mostly a landlocked country, and commerce and people flow through those ports of entry daily by the tens and hundreds of thousands. I was given 30 to 40 soldiers to deal with an enormous border crossing facility, to patrol 100+ linear kilometers of Syrian-Iraqi border, and to patrol and be responsible for the security and development of between 5,000 and 10,000 square kilometers of Al-Anbar Desert with 30 to 40 soldiers. And that's absolutely absurd. That drives to the heart of the lack of troops that we had there from the get-go, and the lack of troops that we didn't have in the years that went on. And that said, those of us at the tactical and operational levels consistently conveyed to our superior commanders the need for more troops, resources, et cetera, to do our job. And that essentially fell on deaf ears. Ricardo Sanchez, in charge of CJTF7, and L. Paul Bremer, in charge of the CPA, were wholly incompetent in their situational awareness / understanding of what was going on basically outside of Baghdad. I know that to be true from personal experience, but I also know that to be true, and I'm flash forwarding a bit as to my experience in the military up until today. In January of 2007, I was asked to be a member of the American Enterprise Institute's Iraq Planning Group as an Iraqi security forces subject matter expert, and I'll explain to you how that came to be in a moment. But AEI, as everyone knows, contrived the surge, which the president adopted. While I was there, I briefed about the nature of corruption. And I'll show you some slides. Jeff, if you could hit slide 1, it's just a picture of me. But there are a couple of slides I wish to show you from that briefing that I conveyed to them. We'll hit the picture. Is the picture last or the picture first? Yeah, the picture. That's a picture of me in a surreal state of, in the middle of an operation in 2005 in South Baghdad, which was a cordon and search operation. Here was a gracious Sunni Arab who invited me on his front yard to have chai with him. I mean, these people were very gracious. I mean, you know, men with guns occupying their country, and you can kind of see by my expression and my exhaustion that the entire event was quite surreal. But anyhow, getting to the matter of AEI, I vehemently, I wrote an op-ed. I spent the better part of my winter leave in December 2006 working on an op-ed that was published in the New York Times on January 14th. It was called "Losing Iraq One Truckload at a Time." And it described the failure of coalition forces to curtail corruption, Iraqi corruption, specifically. I didn't wish to, at that point, since I was on active duty, place the onus on American contractors and generals, because that could be, I could be subject to UCMJ for that. But nevertheless, that was a wonderful, if I don't mind saying so, that was a wonderful moment, because just a few days prior to that, I think on January 10th or 12th, the president gave his New Way Forward strategy, which was a crock of you-know-what. And in it, he mentioned little about corruption. As I saw things through my research, having read extensively reports from the Special Inspector General for Iraqi Reconstruction, the GAO, the DOD, the DOS, USAID, and being an avid reader of mainstream media and alternative sources of the press, naturally I was obsessed with trying to figure out where the discrepancy was with where the generals were promulgating successes and my understanding of the failures that we were experiencing. So the American Enterprise Institute, I would also add that in that period where I briefed them about corruption, if you flip to the next slide, those are just some quotes, and you can peruse them as you like. General Leonard Wood, who during the Spanish-American War expressed frustration about the level of corruption committed by Americans And he very eloquently and honorably offered his resignation if that matter was not to be addressed properly. The second quote is from Ambassador Bunker, I'm sorry, who, as most of the people in this room who are older than myself, know that in 1972, he essentially called upon the administration at that time to attack corruption vigorously, as he saw it as the essence of our failure in Iraq, our failure to enhance governing capacity in South Vietnam. And the third quote is from the current Special Inspector General for Iraqi Reconstruction named Stuart Bowen, who has perpetually stated that corruption is causing the insurgency, is fomenting the civil war. Next slide. That was just in my analysis of the degree to which corruption was being studied by our scholars, our leaders at the highest level. The Iraq Study Group only in two places, and this is alluded to in the op-ed in the New York Times from January '07, only in two places did they talk about corruption. I mean, they basically played lip service to corruption. And that's probably because when you follow the crumb trail with respect to corruption, Iraqi corruption, it leads to American corruption. And investigating American corruption leads to the negligence, mismanagement, incompetence, dereliction of duty of quite a few generals and colonels who have served and still serve. Next slide, please. In that briefing at AEI, I devised with my father, who's been an international economist and a strategist for the better part of his life, what's called the problem tree. And in this problem tree, I won't go into the full explanation of it, but one of the root causes for the instability in Iraq, as you can see from the bottom, is corruption. And if you follow that at your leisure, between corruption and an inadequate strategy leads to other issues, which leads to instability in Iraq, which ultimately leads to coalition forces and Iraqi security forces incapable of stabilizing Iraq and enhancing governing capacity, which in essence means failure. Let's see what the next slide is. The GAO report, one of the lies perpetrated by, and some of this will go into testimony that I'll give on Sunday, but some of the lies and mistruths perpetrated by the generals, colonels, and diplomats in Iraq for the better part of 5-6 years has been this: we have X amount of Iraqi security forces trained and equipped. And as was previously spoken, as is known by all, we have 160,000 troops there now, and we had less just a year ago. Basically a proxy army made up of contractors was developed, contrived by Donald Rumsfeld and the administration, because as I see it in the prelude to the war, it was seemingly unpalatable to the American public to send what Eric Shinseki had deemed what was necessary to accomplish the mission, meaning 300,000 to 500,000 troops. So they dismissed him. He retired, and since they have been consistently incorporating troop numbers, Iraqi security forces troop numbers that are fallacious. As an advisory team leader in Iraq, which was one of my many roles, and again, this goes back to that article from the January New York Times article, 30 to 50% of Iraqi security forces on the payrolls are ghosts. They don't exist. And they don't exist for a number of reasons, because the cronies at the top of the Iraqi government see that as a means of securing considerable sums of money in the forms of salaries of hundreds of thousands of bogus soldiers. And of course, those ghost soldiers and the salaries have undoubtedly gone toward ethnic, tribal, sectarian agendas, which has contributed to the perpetuation of the Civil War. Now, going on from that, in Stuart Bowen, the Special Inspector in General of Iraqi Reconstruction's most recent quarterly report in the January of '08, he mentions that Maliki has dubbed 2008 the year of reconstruction and anti-corruption. Well, funny thing about that, this is 2008. Also of note within the SIGAR's report from January 2008, it reiterates previous reports by SIGAR that Parsons and other American contractors, Bechtel, North Star, et cetera, which have been written about extensively in various news mediums, that of $500 million given in U.S. taxpayer dollars given to Parsons for buildings, health, and education sectors, only 3 of 11 construction projects have been completed, and 141 primary health care centers to the tune of 186 million American taxpayer dollars were not built. Now they conveniently talk about how security conditions were, made it unfeasible for them to construct these contracts that they were asked to do. But the fact of the matter is that that's a lie. There were Americans on many of these sites and private contractors, security contractors protecting them. And Parsons and all of these organizations have yet to be held accountable. And that is largely due to the fact that it's against the administration's interest to hold them accountable because they are members of their constituency. I've noticed that I have 2 minutes left, and I'm gonna go quick with probably the most important document that I have here. I served at the tactical, operational, and strategic levels in Iraq and at AEI. It's kind of unusual for a junior officer to do, so I was privy to generals, colonels, conferences with Abizaid, Casey, et cetera, et cetera. And where is it? Okay, I have evidence in the way of resolution notes dated 29 November '05 between a meeting between Deputy Commanding General Kevin Bergner, who was the Deputy Commanding General of Task Force Freedom, which was in charge of Mosul and northern Iraq in 2005, between the Deputy Commanding General of CPAT, which is the Civilian Police Assistance Transition Team Iraq, which is a sub-entity of Minstiki, the Multinational Security Transition Command Iraq, which was headed by Petraeus at the time. And in his notes, in their correspondence, is a segment titled Mosul Warehouse SOP. And these are quotations from the document itself. This is literal. These are literal statements from Bergner to Chuck Taylor or Brigadier General Waters, both of whom were Deputy Commanding Generals of CPAT under General Joseph Phil, who I will also speak of on Sunday in the panel. And here it is, and I know I'm taking a little bit more time. I promise I'll wrap up. The issue that they brought, that General Bergner brought in November of 2005 is, quote, there is no Minsticky CPAT guidance on how to request, issue, and account for issued Iraqi police equipment. Discussion. Currently, there is no regulation or standard operating procedure pertaining to the issue, receipt, storage of Iraqi police equipment. In addition, there is no guidance on the operation of the LDI warehouse or the responsibilities of Task Force Freedom vis-a-vis the LDI warehouse. The LDI warehouse, I'll let you know, is the acronym for Lee Dynamics International, which has recently come under fire and is being indicted, although I suspect the DOD will try to cover this up as they have so many other things. But they go on to say that Task Force Freedom, Iraqi Security Forces cell, in their Operation Security Forces cell, drafted a basic SOP and provided a copy of this to CPAT and Minsticky. The recommendations that CPAT, they offered recommendations that CPAT issue guidance on the operation of the warehouse, of the LDI warehouse, in order to enhance equipment responsibility at the warehouse, and that CPAT should also provide policy on command supply discipline. The response by CPAT, which was the only priority response in this memorandum, was that they, Task Force Freedom, create a memorandum of understanding between the provincial chief of police, who is an Iraqi, and Task Force Freedom, establishing and outlining the provincial chief of police responsibility to receipt, sign, and account for equipment. In addition, the provincial chief of police must appoint in writing a property book officer, a primary deputy, and an assistant, and that this information should be provided to the Ministry of Interior through Iraqi channels and to Minsticky through coalition forces channels. In essence, what all of that means is that LDI, who was given billions of American taxpayer dollars to procure, store, distribute badly needed supplies to American soldiers to give and support Iraqi police and other Iraqi security forces, was non-existent. There was no SOP. That CPAT had no measure. CPAT, which had the onus of responsibility of ensuring oversight over contractors and the means with which they were purchasing and accounting for Iraqi security forces material purchased by U.S. taxpayer dollars, did not occur. And it's outrageous. And all of that leads back to, and in conclusion, all of that leads back to the fact that General Petraeus, okay, who's been purporting, surge success strategies through his massive information operations cell from MNFI headquarters in Iraq. He was in charge of Minsticky, he was in charge of CPAT, and he failed to implement any systems of accountability for contractors who were given billions of dollars of American taxpayer dollars. And he has not been held accountable, nor has the majority of contractors in Iraq, U.S. contractors in Iraq. And it's outrageous that Congress and the American people have allowed this to go on unchecked.